The ice was thick, cold, and endless. Beneath the frozen surface of Europa, hidden from the light of the distant sun, something stirred after thousands of years of silence. It wasn't just one thing. It was many. A fleet of ships, ancient and massive, lay buried deep under layers of ice that had accumulated over countless centuries. These weren't ordinary ships. They were relics of humanity's past, built during a time when Earth still thrived with life and ambition. Now, after millennia of dormancy, they began to awaken. The first sign of activity came as faint hums echoed through the metal corridors of the flagship Erebus. Its systems, long powered down, flickered back to life like embers reigniting into flames. Lights blinked on, dim at first but growing brighter as power surged through circuits untouched for eons. In the cryogenic chamber, rows of pods hissed open, releasing plumes of freezing vapor into the air. One by one, figures inside the pods stirred, their bodies stiff and unresponsive after so much time in stasis. Captain Daniel Harper was the first to regain consciousness. His eyes fluttered open, squinting against the sudden brightness. He felt disoriented, his mind struggling to process where he was or how much time had passed. The last thing he remembered was giving an order aboard the bridge, something about entering cryo-sleep for the journey home. But everything beyond that was a blur. Slowly, painfully, he sat up, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage away the fog clouding his thoughts. Around him, others began to wake. Lieutenant Rachel Brooks groaned softly as she pushed herself upright, her dark hair matted against her forehead. She glanced around the chamber, taking stock of her surroundings, before turning her attention to Daniel. What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse and weak. "I don't know," Daniel admitted, shaking his head. He swung his legs over the edge of the pod, letting his feet touch the cold floor. "But we need answers, and fast." Nearby, Chief Engineer Paul Carter stirred, coughing violently as he adjusted to breathing again. Unlike the others, he seemed more focused on the technical aspects of their situation. "Systems are booting up," he muttered, glancing at the blinking lights on the walls. Whatever woke us must have triggered the ship's protocols. As the crew regained their bearings, they gathered in the main corridor outside the cryo chamber. Questions buzzed in the air, each person voicing their confusion and concern. Why had they been awakened? What had gone wrong? And most importantly, where were they? Daniel took charge, his natural leadership instincts kicking in despite the haze of uncertainty hanging over them all. "Let's head to the bridge," he said firmly. "We'll check the logs and see if we can figure out what's going on." Walk to the bridge felt surreal. The ship was enormous, its halls lined with sleek metallic walls that reflected their weary faces. Every step echoed loudly in the silence, underscoring the eerie emptiness of the vessel. When they finally reached the bridge, it looked almost exactly as Daniel remembered it, or at least how he thought he remembered it. The control panels hummed softly, and the large view screen dominated the front wall, currently displaying static. Paul immediately got to work, tapping commands into the console. After a few moments, his brow furrowed. "Something's not right," he said. "Our mission data, it's gone. All of it. There's no record of our objectives, no destination coordinates. Nothing." Rachel crossed her arms, frowning deeply. "How is that possible? Someone would have had to erase it manually. Or maybe it never existed in the first place," Daniel suggested grimly. He moved closer to the view screen, staring at the swirling patterns of interference. "Try to bring up external sensors. Let's see where we are." Paul nodded and entered another set of commands. The static faded gradually, replaced by an image that left everyone speechless. Outside the ship, Europa's icy crust stretched endlessly in every direction. Jagged ridges and cracks crisscrossed the landscape, glowing faintly blue under the dim light filtering through the ice above. But what truly caught their attention was the sight of other ships rising slowly from the depths alongside the Erebus. Dozens of vessels, some smaller and others nearly as large as the flagship, emerged from the frozen expanse. Their hulls gleamed dully, showing signs of wear and damage from their long entombment. Together they formed a fleet, a ghostly armada risen from the grave. "What the hell is this?" Rachel whispered, her voice tinged with awe and unease. "It's us," Daniel replied quietly. "This is humanity's fleet, or what's left of it." Before anyone could respond, a new sound filled the bridge, a low, rhythmic pulse emanating from the communications array. Paul turned quickly, his fingers flying across the controls. "We're receiving a signal," he announced. "It's coming from somewhere out there." He pointed vaguely toward the view screen, though the source remained unknown. Daniel stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Patch it through." The screen flickered again, and words appeared in bold letters. "Return home." For a moment, no one spoke. The message was simple, yet its implications weighed heavily on them all. Home meant Earth, but what awaited them there? Had they been called back for salvation, or for something far darker? "We need to find out," Daniel said finally, breaking the silence. "Prepare the fleet. We're heading to Earth." As orders were issued and preparations began, a sense of foreboding settled over the crew. They didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Whatever had awakened them hadn't done so out of kindness. Something, or someone, wanted them to return. And as the fleet broke free of Europa's icy grip and soared toward the stars, none of them could shake the feeling that terror followed close behind. The journey from Europa to Earth was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. The fleet moved as one, a silent procession of ships cutting through the vast emptiness of space. From the bridge of the Erebus, Captain Daniel Harper stared out at the endless void, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. What would they find when they reached Earth? Would there be survivors waiting for them, or would they discover only desolation? Lieutenant Rachel Brooks stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She wasn't used to feeling so powerless, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. "Do you think anyone's still alive down there?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed his worry. "We'll find out soon enough." Behind them, Chief Engineer Paul Carter worked diligently at his station, running diagnostics on the ship's systems. Despite the chaos surrounding them, he found comfort in focusing on the technical details. It gave him something tangible to hold on to, something he could control. As he monitored the readings, however, even he couldn't ignore the growing tension aboard the ship. The crew whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with fear and speculation. No one knew what awaited them, and that unknown weighed heavily on everyone. Hours passed and Earth finally came into view. At first glance it looked familiar, the blue-green orb suspended against the blackness of space, its continents outlined beneath swirling clouds. But as the fleet drew closer, subtle differences became apparent. Dark patches marred the surface where vibrant cities should have been. Thick, unnatural storms churned across entire regions, their colors wrong somehow, too dark, too violent. And then there were the strange formations visible near the equator, sprawling clusters of what looked like organic structures, pulsing faintly with an eerie glow. "It doesn't look right," Rachel murmured, leaning forward to get a better look at the view screen. "What are those things?" Paul frowned, adjusting the zoom on the external cameras. "They're not natural," he said after a moment. "Not unless plants started growing skyscrapers overnight." Daniel clenched his jaw, his gaze fixed on the alien landscape below. "Prepare a landing party," he ordered. "We need to see this up close." Rachel nodded, already moving toward the exit. "I'll gather a team." Within minutes, a small group of volunteers assembled in the hangar bay. Alongside Rachel were two others, Samantha Wells, the communications officer, and Marcus Kane, a seasoned security officer known for his steady demeanor under pressure. They suited up quickly, checking their gear one last time before boarding, a shuttle designed for atmospheric entry. The craft detached smoothly from the Erebus and descended toward Earth, leaving the safety of the fleet behind. As they broke through the atmosphere, the world below revealed itself in greater detail. The once familiar continents were now unrecognizable. Rivers ran dry, forests had turned to ash, and massive craters scarred the land. But it was the glowing structures that dominated the horizon, towering spires made of some kind of living material, twisting and writhing as though alive. Their surfaces shimmered with faint bioluminescence, casting an otherworldly light over the ruins around them. "This place feels wrong," Marcus said, his hand resting instinctively on the grip of his weapon. Samantha nodded, her face pale beneath her helmet visor. "It's like we're trespassing." The shuttle touched down near the outskirts of what used to be New York City. The skyline was gone, replaced by jagged remnants of skyscrapers overtaken by the same organic growths they'd seen from orbit. The air outside was thick and humid, carrying a faint metallic tang that made breathing uncomfortable even through their suits' filters. "Stay sharp," Rachel instructed as the hatch opened. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." Stepping onto the cracked pavement, the team fanned out cautiously. Every step felt heavier than it should, as if the weight of the planet itself pressed down on them. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of movement in the shadows. Whatever life remained on Earth, it wasn't human, or at least not entirely. After several tense minutes of exploration, they stumbled upon a clue, a makeshift shelter tucked inside the shell of an old building. Rags hung haphazardly over broken windows, and faint traces of smoke drifted from a crude fire pit. Inside, they found a group of survivors huddled together, emaciated and wide-eyed with fear. One of them, a man with sunken cheeks and wild hair, spoke first, his voice trembling. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "They'll find you." "Who will?" Rachel asked sharply, stepping closer. "Who's they?" The man hesitated, glancing nervously at the others before answering. "The Veil," he whispered, as if saying the name aloud might summon them. "They hunt us. They take anyone who gets too close." Before Rachel could press further, a low rumble echoed through the ruins. The ground seemed to vibrate, and the survivors scrambled deeper into the shelter, pulling blankets over their heads. Outside, the shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching across the street like grasping fingers. "Get back to the shuttle," Marcus barked, raising his weapon. But it was too late. A shape emerged from the darkness, a figure taller than any human, its form shifting and indistinct. Wherever the light touched it, the creature seemed to blur, as though existing partially in another dimension. Its presence was suffocating, filling the air with a sense of dread that clawed at their minds. "What the hell is that?" Samantha gasped, backing away. Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed the nearest survivor, a young woman clutching a tattered blanket, and pulled her toward the door. "Move!" she shouted, urging the rest of the team to follow. The creature advanced slowly, its movements fluid yet unnatural. Marcus fired a shot, the blast striking true, but the impact did nothing. If anything, the creature seemed amused, letting out a sound that was neither a growl nor a laugh but something in between. "We can't fight it," Rachel yelled, shoving the survivor ahead of her. "Just run." They sprinted back to the shuttle, the creature's distorted form looming, larger with every step. By the time they reached the craft, adrenaline coursed through their veins, pushing them past exhaustion. Marcus slammed the hatch shut just as the creature lunged, its tendrils slamming against the metal with enough force to dent it. Inside, the team collapsed into their seats, panting and shaking. The survivor they'd rescued sat silently, tears streaming down her face. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, though she doubted it offered much comfort. Back aboard the Erebus, the news spread quickly. The crew listened in stunned silence as Rachel recounted what they'd seen: the Veil, the ruined cities, the survivors living in constant fear. For many, it confirmed their worst fears. Humanity's home was lost, claimed by something beyond comprehension. Daniel stood apart from the others, staring out at the planet below. He thought about the message that had awakened them. Return home. Was this why they had been called back? To witness the end of everything they had once known. "We can't give up," Rachel said suddenly, stepping beside him. Her voice was firm despite the exhaustion etched into her features. "Whatever's happening here, we didn't come all this way just to turn back now." Daniel glanced at her, a flicker of determination returning to his eyes. "No," he agreed. "We didn't." But deep down, both of them knew the truth. Whatever terror lurked on Earth, it wasn't done with them yet. And as the fleet hovered above the shattered remains of their world, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. The survivors brought aboard the Erebus were a grim reminder of how much Earth had changed. Huddled together in the medical bay, they clung to each other, their faces pale and haunted. Rachel Brooks watched them carefully, her heart heavy with pity, but also curiosity. These people had been living on the edge of survival for who knows how long, and they carried secrets. Secrets that might explain what had happened to humanity's cradle. One of the survivors, the young woman Rachel, had rescued during the chaotic escape from the ruins, sat apart from the others. Her name was Elena, and though she looked frail, there was a sharpness in her eyes that suggested she'd seen far too much for someone so young. Rachel approached her cautiously, pulling up a chair and sitting down across from her. "We need to know more," Rachel began gently. "What are these things? The ones you called the Veil?" Elena hesitated, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as if trying to hold herself together. "They're not alive, not like us," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "They came after the storm started. At first we thought they were just shadows, tricks of the light. But then they started taking people." "Taking people?" Rachel pressed. "For what?" Elena shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "We don't know. One day someone disappears. The next they come back. Different. Empty. Like something's inside them, controlling them." She shuddered visibly. "That's why we hide. If they find you, it's over." Rachel exchanged a glance with Marcus Kane, who stood nearby, his arms crossed. His expression was grim, but he nodded slightly, signaling his understanding. Whatever these creatures were, they weren't just predators. They were invaders, infiltrators. And if they could control humans, then no one aboard the fleet was truly safe. Back on the bridge, Captain Daniel Harper listened intently as Rachel relayed the information. The room was tense, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone present. Paul Carter leaned over his console, scrolling through data feeds from the ship's sensors. He'd been scanning Earth's surface since their arrival, searching for any sign of the Veil, or whatever else might be out there. "There's something strange about those organic structures," Paul said suddenly, turning to face the group. "They're emitting some kind of energy signature. It's faint, but it matches patterns I've seen before, in old alien tech." Daniel frowned. "Alien tech? You think this is connected to extraterrestrials?" "It's possible," Paul admitted. "But if it is, it's unlike anything we've encountered. This isn't just invasion, it's integration. Those spires aren't separate from the planet. They're part of it now. They've fused with the environment, reshaping everything they touch." Rachel stepped forward, her tone urgent. "If we're dealing with aliens, we need to assume they're watching us. That thing we saw on the surface, it knew we were there. It followed us." Daniel nodded slowly, his mind racing. "Then we can't stay here. Not in orbit, not anywhere near Earth. We'll move the fleet farther out, regroup, and figure out our next move." Before anyone could respond, a sudden alarm blared through the ship. Red lights flashed overhead and the crew scrambled to their stations. On the main view screen, a swarm of dark shapes appeared, emerging from the planet's atmosphere like ink spreading through water. They moved fast, faster than anything human-made, their forms shifting and twisting as they closed in on the fleet. "Shields up," Daniel barked, gripping the edges of his command chair. "All hands, prepare for evasive maneuvers." The Erebus shuddered as the first wave of attackers struck, their impact reverberating through the hull. The creatures, manifestations of the Veil, didn't attack like conventional enemies. Instead of weapons or projectiles, they latched onto the ships with tendrils that seemed to phase through solid matter. Alarms screamed as systems began to fail, circuits overloaded by an unknown force. They're inside the ship. Marcus shouted over the comm, his voice tight with panic. Multiple breaches on decks 4 and 7. Rachel ran toward the nearest access panel, pulling up a schematic of the ship. Sure enough, red markers blinked ominously across several sections, indicating areas where the intruders had breached containment. We need to seal off those sections, she said quickly, before they spread. Paul worked furiously at his station, rerouting power to reinforce the ship's internal defenses. I'm locking down bulkheads, he announced. But we're losing power in some areas. If they get into engineering. He didn't finish the sentence. No one needed him to. On the bridge, Daniel made a split-second decision. Break. Formation, he ordered. Scatter the fleet. We can't let them take all of us at once. The ships peeled away from each other, engines flaring as they tried to evade the relentless assault. But the Veil wasn't deterred. They pursued relentlessly, splitting into smaller groups to chase down individual vessels. The Erebus, being the flagship, drew the most attention, its hull battered by repeated impacts. In the corridors below, chaos reigned. Crew members scrambled to secure hatches and defend critical areas, while others fought desperately against the shadowy figures slipping through walls and floors. Marcus led a team armed with electromagnetic pulse, EMP grenades, hoping to disrupt the creatures' connection to whatever controlled them. Each blast sent the Veil reeling, forcing them to retreat momentarily, but it wasn't enough to stop them completely. Rachel found herself cornered in a storage bay, her weapon trained on the writhing mass of darkness closing in on her. Her breath came in short gasps, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Just as the creature lunged, a bright flash erupted, sending it sprawling backward. Behind it stood Elena, holding a makeshift EMP device she'd cobbled together using parts scavenged from the medical bay. You saved me, Rachel said, lowering her weapon slightly. Elena shrugged, though her hands trembled. You saved me. First? Together they fought their way back to the bridge, where Daniel and Paul were coordinating the fleet's retreat. By the time they arrived, the situation had stabilized somewhat. The scattered ships had managed to put distance between themselves and the Veil, buying precious time. But the cost had been high. Several vessels reported casualties, and one ship had gone completely dark, its fate unknown. As the immediate threat subsided, Daniel addressed the crew over the intercom. His voice was steady, though exhaustion lined his face. We've survived this round, he said. But make no mistake, this isn't over. The Veil isn't just an enemy, it's a warning. Whatever did this to Earth, it's still out there, and we need to find it before it finds us. Rachel glanced at Elena, who stood quietly beside her. There was resilience in the young woman's eyes, a spark of defiance despite everything she'd endured. For the first time since arriving, Rachel felt a glimmer of hope. Humanity might have lost its home, but it hadn't lost its spirit. Not yet. And as the fleet drifted farther from Earth, leaving behind the ruins and the horrors that lurked within them, the crew of the Erebus prepared for the battles ahead. They didn't know what awaited them in the depths of space, but one thing was certain. They would face it together. Because even in the darkest times, humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to endure, to rise again, no matter how many times it fell. The fleet drifted in the cold silence of space, far enough from Earth to feel safe, for now. But safety was an illusion, and everyone aboard the Erebus knew it. The attack by the Veil had left scars, not just on the ships, but on the crew. Repairs were underway, welding torches casting bright sparks in the dimly lit corridors as engineers worked tirelessly to patch up the damage. Yet the physical wounds were nothing compared to the unease that lingered in the air, a tension so thick it felt like it could choke someone if they stood still for too long. On the bridge, Captain Daniel Harper stared at the main view screen, which displayed a star map dotted with blinking icons representing the scattered fleet. His hands rested on the edge of his command chair, knuckles white from gripping too tightly. He hadn't slept since the battle, his mind replaying every moment. The chaos, the screams, the way the Veil seemed to slip through walls and minds alike. Whatever these creatures were, they weren't ordinary enemies. They were something More. Captain, Chief Engineer Paul Carter said, breaking the silence. We've stabilized the power systems, but we're running low on resources. If we keep using EMPs at this rate, we'll burn out our generators. Daniel nodded absently, his gaze still fixed on the screen. We need answers, he muttered. Not just about the veil, but about why Earth is the way it is. Something caused all this. Those storms, those structures, the survivors being driven underground. There's a bigger picture here, and we're missing it. Rachel Brooks, standing nearby, crossed her arms over her chest. You think the veil is connected to whatever happened to Earth? It has to be, Daniel replied. Nothing else makes sense. Those spires, the energy signatures Paul found, they're not natural. Someone or something did this. And if we can figure out who or what, maybe we can stop it. Before anyone could respond, Communications Officer Samantha Wells spoke up, her voice hesitant. Sir, I've been monitoring transmissions. I'm picking up whispers. Whispers? Rachel asked, turning toward her. Samantha nodded, her face pale. It's faint, almost like static, but there are patterns, words. I can't make them out clearly, but... She trailed off, glancing nervously at the console. Daniel straightened, his attention snapping to her. Play it. Samantha tapped a few commands, and the room filled with a low, distorted hum. Beneath it, voices could be heard, too faint to understand, yet unmistakably present. They sounded wrong, layered and disjointed, as though multiple speakers were talking at once. Chills ran down Rachel's spine as she listened, the hairs on her arms standing on end. What is that? Marcus Kane asked, stepping closer. His hand hovered near his weapon, ready for anything. I don't know, Samantha admitted. But it's coming from inside the ship. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances. If the whispers were real and not some trick of their minds, it meant the veil wasn't just outside anymore. It was here aboard the Erebus, lurking somewhere in the shadows. We need to find the source, Daniel said firmly, breaking the silence. Paul, check the ship's internal sensors. Look for anomalies, anything unusual. Rachel, take a team and sweep the lower decks. Start with the areas where we had breaches during the attack. Rachel nodded, already moving toward the exit. Marcus followed close behind, along with a small group of armed crew members. As they descended into the bowels of the ship, the atmosphere grew darker, colder. The hum of machinery faded, replaced by an oppressive quiet that made every footstep echo unnaturally loud. They moved methodically, checking each corridor and compartment. At first, everything seemed normal, or as normal as it could be after the recent attack. But then, halfway through Deck 5, they noticed something strange. A faint glow emanated from behind a sealed hatch, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. What is that? One of the crew members whispered, pointing at the light. Rachel stepped forward cautiously, her weapon raised. Stand back, she ordered. With a deep breath, she keyed open the hatch. Inside, the walls were covered in a thin layer of black vein-like tendrils that pulsed with the same eerie glow. In the center of the room sat a dark mass, shifting and writhing as though alive. It's the veil, Marcus breathed, his voice tight with alarm. Before anyone could react, the mass surged outward, tendrils lashing like whips. The crew fired, their weapons, but the shots passed harmlessly through the creature, doing no visible damage. It lunged at them, forcing them to retreat hastily. Rachel slammed the hatch shut, sealing the room off before the thing could escape. Report to the bridge, she said sharply into her comm. We've got a problem. Back on the bridge, Daniel listened intently as Rachel described what they'd found. His jaw tightened, his expression grim. Containment protocols, he ordered. Seal off that section and reroute power to reinforce the bulkheads. We can't let it spread. Paul worked quickly, isolating the affected area while Samantha continued analyzing the whispers. The voices grew louder, clearer, as if responding to the creature trapped below. Finally, she managed to isolate a single phrase. Join us. They're trying to communicate, Samantha said, her voice trembling. Or maybe trying to control us. Rachel exchanged a worried glance with Daniel. If they're influencing people, we need to watch for signs. Anyone acting strangely, report it immediately. As the hours passed, paranoia began to seep into the crew. Shadows seemed longer than they should be. Movements in peripheral vision triggered startled reactions, and whispers echoed faintly in empty hallways. Some crew members refused to work alone, sticking close to others even during routine tasks. Others claimed they saw figures moving in the darkness only to find nothing when they turned to look. Elena, the young survivor, stayed close to Rachel, her presence offering a small measure of comfort. "They're testing us," she said quietly one evening as they walked through the mess hall, "seeing how far they can push before we break." Rachel stopped, looking at her. "How do you know?" Elena shrugged, her eyes distant. "Because that's what they did on Earth. They didn't destroy everything at once. They wore us down piece by piece until there was nothing left." Her words sent a chill through Rachel. If Elena was right, then the Veil wasn't just attacking, they were probing, learning. And the longer they stayed aboard the Erebus, the more vulnerable they became. That night, the nightmares began. Crew members woke screaming, drenched in sweat, claiming they'd seen shadowy figures standing at the foot of their bunks. Others reported hearing voices calling their names, urging them to step into the darkness. Even Daniel, usually unshakable, found himself waking abruptly, his heart pounding as he stared into the pitch blackness of his quarters. By morning, tensions were at a breaking point. Arguments erupted in the corridors, minor disagreements escalating into shouting matches. Morale plummeted, and trust eroded. No one knew who to believe or what to fear most. The veil outside, the whispers within, or the growing cracks in their own sanity. In the midst of the chaos, Paul made a discovery. While reviewing the ship's logs, he noticed something odd. Fluctuations in the life support systems. Oxygen levels were dropping slightly in certain sections, though not enough to trigger alarms. At first, he thought it might be a malfunction. But when he cross-referenced the data with the locations of recent disturbances, a pattern emerged. "They're manipulating the environment," he told Daniel and Rachel later that day. "Changing things little by little, pushing us closer to the edge without us realizing it." Rachel's stomach sank. "So we're not just fighting them, we're fighting ourselves." Daniel clenched his fists, frustration etched across his face. "We can't keep running scared. If we don't take the fight to them, they'll pick us apart until there's nothing left." "But how?" Rachel asked. EMP grenades slowed them down, but they didn't stop them. "What do we have that can actually kill them?" For a moment, no one spoke. Then Paul hesitated, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe we don't need to kill them," he said slowly. "Maybe we just need to understand them." The idea hung in the air, fragile yet promising. Understanding the enemy might be their only chance, but it would require risking everything. And as the fleet drifted silently through the void, surrounded by whispers and shadows, the crew of the Erebus prepared to face their greatest challenge yet. Not just the Veil, but the darkness within themselves. The decision to confront the Veil head-on wasn't made lightly. Captain Daniel Harper knew it was risky, perhaps even reckless. But staying passive meant giving the enemy time to grow stronger, to spread its influence further throughout the fleet. Every hour they delayed was another hour the Veil had to burrow deeper into their minds, their systems, their very souls. Action, no matter how dangerous, was their only option. Paul Carter spent hours poring over data from the earlier encounters, searching for patterns or weaknesses in the Veil's behavior. He worked tirelessly, his face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens as he cross-referenced sensor readings, energy signatures, and survivor testimonies. Finally, he found something. A faint resonance in the electromagnetic spectrum that seemed to correspond with moments when the Veil weakened. It wasn't much, but it was a clue. "If we can amplify that frequency," Paul explained to Daniel and Rachel during a late-night briefing, "we might be able to disrupt them on a larger scale, not just temporarily like the EMPs, but permanently." Rachel frowned, leaning forward. "How do we do that?" "We don't exactly have the resources to build some kind of superweapon." "We don't need a weapon," Paul replied. "We already have the tools, we just need to modify them." The ship's reactors are powerful enough to generate the right frequency if we reroute their output. It'll take some creative engineering, but I think I can make it work. Daniel nodded slowly, weighing the risks. Do it, he said finally. But keep it quiet. I don't want panic spreading through the crew any more than it already has. As Paul got to work, Daniel turned his attention to preparing the fleet for what lay ahead. They couldn't fight the Veil alone, not without help. Using the star map displayed on the bridge, he identified a nearby moon orbiting Saturn, where old human outposts were rumored to exist. If they could find usable technology or reinforcements there, it might give them an edge. Set course for Titan, Daniel ordered, and send a message to the rest of the fleet. Tell them we're heading to investigate potential allies. The journey to Titan was tense. Crew members jumped at every sound, their nerves frayed after days of living under siege. Whispers still echoed through the corridors, though fewer people reported hearing them now. Perhaps the containment measures were working, or perhaps the Veil was biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. When they arrived at Titan, the landscape was bleak and desolate. Frozen plains stretched endlessly beneath, a pale orange sky, dotted with jagged ice formations and craters. Scans revealed traces of abandoned structures buried beneath the surface, remnants of humanity's failed attempts to colonize the outer planets. Daniel led a small team down to investigate, accompanied by Rachel, Marcus Kane, and Elena. The descent was uneventful, but the eerie silence of the moon's surface sent shivers down their spines. The shuttle landed near one of the largest structures, a domed facility half buried in ice. As they approached, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though unseen eyes watched their every move. Inside the dome, the evidence of abandonment was clear. Dust coated every surface, and equipment lay scattered haphazardly, as if the occupants had fled in a hurry. But there were signs of life, or something resembling it. Strange markings covered the walls, glowing faintly with the same bioluminescent light they'd seen on Earth. And then there were the ships. Docked inside the facility were vessels, eerily, similar to those in their own fleet, but altered. Their sleek designs were marred by organic growths, tendrils wrapping around hulls and penetrating interiors. Whatever had taken over these ships had done so completely, merging machine and alien biology into something unnatural. This place is a graveyard, Marcus muttered, his weapon raised as he scanned the shadows. Rachel stepped cautiously toward one of the ships, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Look, she said, pointing at a console embedded in the wall. Logs. Maybe we can find out what happened here. Elena joined her, helping decipher the fragmented entries stored within the system. The logs painted a grim picture. Crews, stranded on Titan after losing contact with Earth, desperate attempts to survive, and then infection. The Veil had come for them too, infiltrating their minds and bodies until nothing human remained. One final entry stood out, a warning scrawled hastily across the screen. They are not gone. They wait. Do not trust the machines. Before they could process the message, a low rumble shook the facility. The ground trembled and the organic tendrils covering the ships began to writhe violently. Something was waking up. We need to leave. Now! Daniel shouted, grabbing Elena's arm and pulling her back toward the entrance, but it was too late. The largest ship groaned to life, its engines flaring as tendrils slithered outward, reaching for the intruders. Shadows coalesced into humanoid forms, their shapes shifting and distorting as they advanced. The Veil had been lying dormant, waiting for someone to awaken it. Marcus fired first, his shots doing little to slow the creatures. Rachel tried activating an EMP grenade, but the pulse barely phased them this time. Whatever these manifestations were, they were stronger, faster, smarter. Fall back, Daniel yelled, leading the group toward the exit. Behind them, the ship's docking bay doors began to close, sealing them inside. Thinking quickly, Elena spotted a control panel near the door. She sprinted toward it, dodging grasping tendrils as she went. Her hands flew over the buttons, overriding the mechanism just as the others reached her. They burst outside, the cold air biting at their skin as they ran for the shuttle. The veil pursued them relentlessly, flowing across the frozen terrain like liquid shadow. Just as they reached the shuttle, one of the creatures lunged, knocking Rachel off her feet. Before it could strike, Marcus tackled it, driving his weapon into its writhing form. For a brief moment, the creature screamed, a sound both human and alien, and dissolved into smoke. "Go! Get us out of here!" Daniel shouted to the pilot as everyone piled aboard. The shuttle ascended rapidly, leaving the horrors of Titan behind. As they re-entered space, the team sat in stunned silence, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Whatever they'd unleashed below, it wasn't finished with them yet. Back aboard the Erebus, Paul greeted them with grim news. "I've completed the modifications to the reactor," he said. "But there's a catch. Amplifying the frequency will overload the system. Once we activate it, we won't be able to shut it down." Daniel exchanged a glance with Rachel. There was no turning back now. They were committed to this path no matter the cost. "Prepare the fleet," Daniel ordered. "We're taking the fight to the Veil." The plan was simple, yet perilous. Using the modified reactors, they would broadcast the amplified frequency across the fleet, creating a massive disruption field designed to weaken or destroy the Veil's hold. Timing was critical. They needed to ensure all ships synchronized their efforts perfectly. Any delay could mean disaster. As preparations continued, tensions ran high. Some crew members questioned the wisdom of risking everything on an untested theory, while others embraced the plan as their only hope. Arguments broke out, tempers flared, and the whispers grew louder, feeding on the discord. On the eve of the operation, Rachel found herself standing alone on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She thought about Earth, about the ruins and the survivors hiding underground. She thought about the Veil and the countless lives it had claimed. And she thought about the fleet, the last remnants of humanity, clinging to survival against impossible odds. Elena joined her quietly, standing beside her without speaking. After a long pause, she said softly, "You're scared." Rachel didn't deny it. "Of course I am. Aren't you?" Elena nodded. "But fear doesn't mean we stop fighting. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us going." Rachel smiled faintly, grateful for the young woman's resilience. Despite everything she'd endured, Elena hadn't given up. Neither would Rachel. The next morning, the fleet gathered in formation, ready to execute the plan. On the bridge of the Erebus, Daniel gave the order that would change everything. Activate the reactors. Energy surged through the ships, building to a crescendo as the amplified frequency pulsed outward. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the shadows began to fade, retreating into the void from which they came. The whispers died away, replaced by an almost deafening silence. It worked, but victory came at a price. The reactors overloaded, as expected, forcing several ships to drop out of formation. Smoke filled the corridors of the Erebus as circuits fried and alarms blared. Yet amidst the chaos, a sense of triumph took root. They had struck a blow against the Veil, one strong, enough to buy them time. As repairs began and the crew assessed the damage, Daniel addressed them over the intercom. His voice was steady, filled with resolve. "We've taken our first step," he said, "but this war isn't over. The Veil may be weakened, but it's not gone. And neither are we." For the first time in days, hope flickered among the crew. They had faced the darkness and emerged battered but alive. Together they vowed to keep fighting, for Earth, for humanity, and for the future they refused to surrender.